I'm Gillian Heng from Open Road Service, NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde. This DVD is a training resource to aid discussion regarding violence against women. Several professionals are involved in this discussion who come from the background of running services, or are training practitioners, or work in the field of preventing violence and abuse. Those people include Anne Hain from EVA Services, NHS Lanarkshire, Nell Whiting from Scottish Women's Aid, Mark Ward from Men's Health Forum Scotland, Nazra Bibi from Lothian Violence Against Women Training Consortium, and Rory McRae from the Domestic Violence Probation Project. The discussion was chaired by Beth Cumming. We'll start this discussion by considering domestic abuse and why women stay in abusive relationships. We'll then move on to consider the experience of men and also to think about the experience of boys. The discussion will then consider some of the wider aspects of violence against women, and finally we'll talk about what we can do to change things.
For me, I think it's the wrong question. I think we've been, for 30 years since we've been working on this as an issue that needs to be addressed, I think the focus has been quite understandably on what we can do to protect women who are experiencing abuse. I think expectations have tended to be placed on women to leave, on women to protect their children from the effects of this violence. So the expectations of professionals, I think, have tended to all be placed on the woman who's already experiencing the violence, and very little is done to make expectations of the men that are actually using the violence.
I suppose the kind of logical extension of that argument is that ultimately it would become, the situation would become the woman's fault for not actually reacting to it by leaving, you know, so that the whole dynamic gets shifted onto this is a deficit on the part of the woman for not doing something about it, as opposed to the man who's actually perpetrating the abuse in the first place.
And it misunderstands the kind of the dynamics of domestic abuse. And what domestic abuse does is kind of strip away very frequently your sense of self, your confidence, not just in yourself but in agencies that are there to help you. You've been told time and time again that, you know, they're not going to believe you, or they're not going to be there to help you. So really what's happened is that your space for action that you have has become smaller and smaller and smaller.
I think what you're talking about there is distorted perspectives, in that distortion of your reality, in terms of, you know, what we're talking about in relation to domestic abuse is a process of becoming, you know, your way of seeing what's happening to you becoming completely distorted. And I think sometimes the danger is actually that we so get focused on the individual and the woman and what's going on in that relationship that we don't actually acknowledge that there are structural issues at play here. The barriers to leaving are also about structural issues. When we think about, you know, women from black minority ethnic communities, you know, the barriers can be even more, you know, more complex. You know, for any woman it's really hard to leave, but there can be issues around racism, there can be issues around discrimination.
When a perpetrator does genuinely, you know, seem remorseful about their actions, of course you want to forgive them and take them back. That's understandable for women to do that.
I think it's important also to say that for some women it's actually quite a rational decision not to leave. And I think women in that situation often know instinctively that actually leaving might put them more at risk.
It's understandable that it's a natural response to say, remove her from the situation, because by removing her from the situation we think it makes her safer. But in fact, from experience of working with women who have experienced abuse, they don't feel safer, and invariably there may be some stalking and harassment, especially if there's child contact afterwards. And certainly from the women that we work with, we find that they can be terrified to leave because of that. And also they just feel like it's like stepping off a cliff. They don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what homeless accommodation might be like. They don't want to remove their children from school. They don't want to lose their family and friends networks that are around about them. So it's not as simple as remove her from it and it's all fine and dandy.
Mm-hmm.
The
big kind of story that runs through all of this, almost like the writing through, you know, a stick of rock, is that word love.
Yeah.
And that confuses everything.
The added dynamic for some black minority ethnic women, where actually the whole concept of shame and honour is a huge barrier in terms of it being used as a control mechanism. So when we're thinking about black minority ethnic women leaving, they have to consider that, and that's not just about risks posed by a perpetrator, but actually it's about risks that are posed by the family as well as the community at large as well.
Men's experience of domestic violence and domestic abuse is different from women's, and that's the key thing that we need to take into account, the fact that it's different, and because of that we need to make different, properly informed responses. But for me the crucial issue here is about the impact and the effect of the violence or abuse that is happening. And when we actually talk to men who record themselves, to report themselves as being victims, the impact of it is far, far less. When men are victims, they're far less likely to be living in fear within their own home. They're far less likely to feel controlled within the situation. And when we look at the circumstances of men who are victims, they're very often financially better off. They're in a more secure social situation, and they're more likely to be in employment, they're more likely to have better general health. There are a whole range of different circumstances that are different. And I think the other thing that really we need to think about to understand the full picture here is that very often when men are victims, or are recorded as victims, they are also perpetrators. So just to record a man as being a victim doesn't give an indication of the true reality. So it's one of those situations where the statistics on the surface can be can indicate one picture. If we look at that too simplistically and don't take into account the broader circumstances, then I think we're really in danger of not only not being able to respond effectively to the needs of the people affected, but most importantly not being able to properly provide the support for men who are genuinely living in fear and experiencing, in some cases, very, very severe violence and abuse.
I'm interested in when we've been talking up till now about situations where there's been violence and abuse. We've been talking about heterosexual relationships. Is it the same in same-sex relationships, or are there different dynamics going on there?
We're still talking about an ongoing pattern of controlling behaviour where a range of tools are used by a perpetrator, violence being one of those, but other kind of controls, isolation and just kind of crazy making behaviour, and that's absolutely the same in same-sex relationships. I think that there are also particular tools, I suppose, at the disposal of a man or a woman in a same-sex relationship. It's quite easy to say, no, I'm not abusing you. This is just a fight. And I think that does happen quite a lot. That kind of myth of a fair fight.
LGBT relationships generally are less visible than heterosexual relationships, and this is one of the key factors. Outing, which is telling people of someone's LGBT status, can in itself be used as a method of control and intimidation by an abusive partner. Another common threat is when access to children is denied, particularly by the biological parent with regard to the non-biological parent. Often, this can be perpetuated by service providers who may also believe that the biological parent is the only real parent. Lots of people in same-sex relationships don't report domestic abuse. There can be several reasons for this. One reason may be that they fear a homophobic response from service providers. They may fear that the service provider won't believe their story and that what's happened to them is actually true. Also, the abusive partner may have told the person that they won't be believed.
I think if we say that there is a linear relationship between children who experience abuse in their family household will then go on to perpetrate abuse, it's much more complicated than that. There are many other influences in a child's life, their age, their stage of development, their support networks, their relationships with both parents, school, friends, that will all impact on how they experience that abuse and how they will then hopefully be supported to understand what they've experienced and then move on from it. To say that every child who is in an abusive household will either go on to abuse or seek out an abusive partner in their adulthood really gives them no scope for making choices and decisions themselves. And lots of children and young people absolutely abhor the idea of violence because they have been terrified by it and they wouldn't want to continue that when they become an adult.
I think that's interesting. I think we need to be really clear that there is nothing automatic about this intergenerational cycle. And as you say, it would deny the experience of all of the wee boys who have sworn that they will be very, very different and have gone on to be very different. I have to say, however, that when looking at the makeup of the groups that we run or the men that we work with, a high proportion of those men who abuse have experienced domestic abuse as children. So I think we can't dismiss the link altogether. We need to dismiss the automatic link, but we can't dismiss the link altogether. But it's so complicated because as teenage boys, what they had to do was, or what they felt they had to do in order to be young men, was to often to defend their mothers with violence.
Violence is never inevitable and is therefore avoidable, is preventable. But I also think we need to look at, in a broader sense, the messages young men and boys get, particularly from older men in their lives, so their fathers, their brothers, their uncles, other men in the community. And I think that's very important in terms of domestic violence and abuse, but I also think the messages that we give to young men about violence in general are very, very important. And Rory touched on it, that it's these circumstances where in some cases we tell young men it's good to be violent, it's a virtuous thing. And in other situations we're saying, no, I'm sorry, that's completely unacceptable. So young men are very often getting conflicting and confusing messages about violence and where it sits in the reality. And I think that's something that we all have to take responsibility for having a part in shaping the experience of young men as they grow up. All men have got a part to play in this. So whether men are perceived as or perceive themselves as being victims, or whether men are perpetrators, or whether they're men who don't see themselves as in either role, all men have a responsibility in this. Society at large has a responsibility here, and I think a big part of the work, particularly around prevention, is in creating opportunities for non-perpetrating men to actually challenge domestic violence and abuse. And some of the work we've been involved in around the White Ribbon campaign in Scotland is one way that can happen, where men sign a pledge where they say they will never commit, condone or remain silent about violence against women.
Violence against women is an umbrella term used to describe various forms of abuse, mostly perpetrated by men against women, and may start in childhood. Indeed, early experiences of abuse may lead to further vulnerability throughout the person's adult life. The Scottish Government defines it as physical, sexual and psychological violence occurring in the family, within the general community or in institutions, including domestic abuse, rape, incest and child sexual abuse. Sexual harassment and intimidation at work and in the public sphere, commercial sexual exploitation including prostitution, pornography and trafficking, dowry-related violence, female genital mutilation, forced and child marriages and honour crimes.
We talk about a continuum of violence, so a continuum that might occur throughout the course of someone's life. The various types of violence or abuse that someone might experience, but also a continuum in the other kind of dictionary definition, which is a series of things that have a similar underpinning. And I think that what underpins domestic abuse or rape or stalking or any of the other forms of violence that we might wish to think about is this, these stereotypes and this historical inequality between men and women.
I think for me, when you talk about a continuum, we're also talking about a continuum in terms of attitudes and values that drive the causes of violence against women, and those values and attitudes quite often being about, you know, how valued might you be if you're born as a girl or if you're born as a boy in certain parts of the world, and we, you know, we mustn't lose sight, I think, of the kind of global context within which a lot of this is happening.
We really do need to look at some of the structural, some of the socio-cultural stories that we're taught about what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, and the messages that we get. So the expectations that we as men and women have about our roles, not just in society, but our roles in relationships.
From before birth, gender stereotypes start to be imposed. You know, from the moment of birth, the way the baby is held, is spoken to, is spoken about, right away the gender stereotypes are placed on whether it's a boy or a girl, and the expectations start. And I think unless we look at the very kind of broad picture in society that give us messages throughout our life about what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman, and how men and women should relate to each other.
I'm just thinking about the media and just the absolute proliferation of the sort of sexualised context in which children, both boys and girls, are growing up. Nowadays, the sexualisation of girls from a very, very young age, that you'll get a girls' magazine that has a little lip gloss attached to it that says, you know, you can have luscious lips when you're, you know, 5 or 6 years of age. There are shops selling brand pant sets or padded bras, padded bikinis for young children. Those messages are undeniably out there, and therefore objectifying young girls and giving young boys the message that girls are there to be looked at. If we think about what other countries around the world are doing, I mean, at the moment we're seeing Iceland have just banned lap dancing clubs because fundamentally they perceive commercial sexual exploitation of women as damaging to their societal messages in terms of gender equality and respect for each other. We've got the Swedish legislation around prostitution, and they're doing some of what we've talked about already today, about turning those messages round, and instead of saying they have a problem with prostitution and women in prostitution, they say they have a problem with men who buy sex. So it's about that global approach to making this message unacceptable. As Mark said earlier, this is preventable, but we have to step up to the plate and actually have robust measures where we say that this is unacceptable to us as a society.
Part of the key to that is actually looking at the pledge of the White Ribbon campaign, which on the face of it is very simple: never to commit, condone or remain silent about violence against women. For me, the really challenging part is in the not remaining silent. That's the bit where it's actually about action, and that's not always easy. You know, you're in the pub with your mates and people are expressing views that are really, you know, in your views as a man who has signed that pledge are wrong. It's not always easy to be able to stand up and say, no, wait a minute, and to challenge it. And actually speaking out is a very, very difficult thing to do sometimes, but unless we do, then change won't happen. It's about individuals taking responsibility.
Comparison we use about the sea change we've had about the acceptability of drink driving. You know, 20, 30 years ago, somebody picked up their keys and off they went and nobody really stopped them. But now there would be an intervention. Someone would step in and say, absolutely not, I'm not letting you drive home, get a taxi or whatever. So it's that shift that we need to happen in society. So it's perfectly acceptable to be the person that stands up and says, no, this isn't good enough.
We kind of want to look at it both ways. What can individuals do to affect change? And that might be, you know, quite small stuff, but also we need to be looking for leadership from community leaders and from governments. And I think in a sense we have some useful tools that help us with that, the gender equality duty, which allows us to think about the differences in men's and women's lives and the different impacts of different issues on men's and women's lives. The Safer Lives document that came out of the Scottish Government, which highlighted the connections between the different forms of violence against women and looked at ways in which we might want to tackle that issue. The hope that I always hold on to is because of the stuff that we're talking about, that violence against women and other forms of gender-based violence are in part a consequence of learned patterns of behaviour, of stereotypes, are a cause and consequence of gender inequality. If we're saying that's learned, it can be unlearned in the future. It can be unpicked. We can help children to find a different script. But, and there's a but, the children can't learn another script. The adults of the future are not going to have a different script unless we, the adults of today, are working on that. So we too need to be thinking about our attitudes.
For me, the fundamental question is, to ask yourself that question around what's my professional responsibility here. You have a duty of care to the people that use your services, whether you're a manager who's developing policies and practice, or whether you're on the front line in terms of, responding to someone who comes through the door and may or may not disclose their experiences. And I guess, it's about asking yourself the question about how do I communicate my understanding and awareness of the issues.
The discussion's really come full circle. We're going back to talking about the messages that those professionals give, that is about not women blaming. It's not really about men blaming, but it's about placing responsibility and placing expectations on men to change.
For me, violence against women is neither acceptable nor inevitable. By challenging violence against women, we can create a fairer society and better quality of life, both for women and also for men.